The faded letter crumpled in Zara Zimmerman's trembling fingers as she stared out across the vast Dakota territory. The year was 1878, and the news of her fiancé's death had reached her 3 days prior, turning her world to ash. Thomas had gone west to stake their claim, to build them a home before sending for her. Instead, the only thing that returned was his personal effects and a brief note explaining that he'd been killed in a dispute over land rights. The stagecoach lurched beneath her, and Zara clutched the small leather pouch containing the wedding ring Thomas had carried with him. It was supposed to have been placed on her finger in a joyful ceremony. Now it represented nothing but broken dreams. First time out west. Miss? The older woman across from her had kind eyes and a weathered face that spoke of years under the prairie sun. Yes, Zara replied softly. I was to be married. The woman nodded knowingly. Was, she repeated. I'm sorry, dear. Zara tucked the letter away, squaring her shoulders. Thomas had purchased land near a growing settlement called Cottonwood Springs. She had nowhere else to go, so forward was her only option. The teacher position she'd secured months ago would provide her livelihood now, though the thought of facing a classroom of strangers while grieving seemed an insurmountable task. As the stagecoach rolled into Cottonwood Springs, Zara was struck by how raw everything appeared. The main street was little more than packed dirt lined with wooden buildings in various stages of completion. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats moved with purpose, barely glancing at the arriving stage. Last stop, Cottonwood Springs, called the driver as he set the brake. Zara gathered her 2 modest bags and stepped down into the dust. The warm May air carried the scent of horses, sawdust, and something cooking that made her empty stomach rumble. She had eaten little since receiving the news about Thomas. Miss Zimmerman? A tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest approached. Sheriff Miller, the school board asked me to meet you. We weren't sure you'd still come after learning of Thomas's death, she finished for him. I had already given notice at my previous position. There was nothing to go back to. The sheriff nodded, taking her bags. The schoolhouse isn't quite finished, but the teachers' quarters are ready. The school term starts in 2 weeks. As they walked down the street, Zara felt eyes upon her. A new face was always noticed in small towns, especially a woman traveling alone. She kept her gaze forward, her spine straight, refusing to show weakness. They passed the general store, the saloon, and a building marked Gunther Young, Blacksmith, when a commotion erupted ahead. A horse reared as a wagon wheel broke loose, sending barrels tumbling toward them. Before Zara could react, strong hands pulled her aside as a barrel rolled past, missing her by inches. She found herself pressed against a solid chest, the scent of leather and forge smoke filling her senses. You all right, madam? She looked up into eyes the color of a summer storm, set in a sun-bronzed face partially obscured by several days' worth of beard. The man wore no jacket, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. Yes, she managed, stepping away quickly. Thank you, mister. Young, Grady Young. He tipped his hat. Town blacksmith. Sheriff Miller approached, relief evident on his face. Good reflexes, Grady. Miss Zimmerman is our new school teacher. Something flickered in Grady Young's eyes as he looked at her again. Thomas Mercer's intended? The direct mention of Thomas sent a fresh wave of grief through her, but she nodded. Yes. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Zimmerman. Thomas was a good man. Did you know him well? She asked, suddenly desperate for any connection to her lost love. Grady shifted his weight. We worked the same claim for a spell before he moved on to establish his homestead. He spoke often of you. Before Zara could inquire further, men were calling for the blacksmith's help with the broken wagon. With another tip of his hat, Grady Young moved away, leaving Zara with the strange sensation that their paths would cross again. The teacher's quarters turned out to be a small but sturdy cabin attached to the rear of the nearly completed schoolhouse. It contained a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a bookshelf. Simple, but more than adequate for her needs. The ladies from the church will be by shortly with some supplies and food, Sheriff Miller explained. School board meeting is tomorrow at noon, if you're up to it. After he left, Zara sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. She reached into her pocket and retrieved the small leather pouch, emptying its contents into her palm. The gold wedding band gleamed in the afternoon light, streaming through the window. "Why did you have to die, Thomas?" she whispered to the empty room. True to the sheriff's word, several women arrived within the hour, bearing food, linens, and curious stares. Their welcome was genuine, if somewhat reserved, and Zara understood they were giving her space to grieve while also sizing up the woman who would be teaching their children. "I'm Martha Holloway," said a plump woman with kind eyes. "My husband sits on the school board. We have 3 children who will be in your class." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Zara replied, summoning a polite smile. "The men are planning to finish the schoolhouse this week," added another woman, introducing herself as Esther White. "My Robert is the town doctor." As they helped her settle in, Zara learned more about Cottonwood Springs. Established just 4 years prior, the town was growing steadily with the promise of the railroad coming through within the next year. There were approximately 30 children of school age, ranging from 6 to 16. "What about Thomas Mercer's claim?" Zara asked as they prepared to leave. "Is it far from town?" The women exchanged glances. "About 5 miles north," Martha replied. "Beautiful piece of land with a creek running through it. Thomas had started building a cabin there." "I would like to see it," Zara said firmly. "It's not proper for a lady to go out there alone," Esther protested. "Perhaps Grady Young could escort you," Martha suggested. "He checks on the place occasionally," since he and Thomas were friends. After they left, Zara unpacked her few belongings and tried to make the small cabin feel like home. She placed Thomas's photograph on the table beside her bed and touched the ring in her pocket like a talisman. Tomorrow, she would begin building her new life, alone. The school board meeting the next day was brief but productive. Zara met the 5 men who would oversee her work, including Martha's husband, John Holloway, and Robert White, the doctor. They seemed pleased with her credentials and experience teaching in Philadelphia. "We've ordered books, but they may not arrive before school starts," John explained. "We have some primers and readers that families have donated." "I've brought some of my own materials," Zara assured them. "We can manage until the rest arrive." As the meeting concluded, Zara found herself looking around for the blacksmith, but Grady Young wasn't present. She chided herself for the disappointment she felt. Later that afternoon, as Zara was arranging her books on the shelf, a knock at her door revealed the very man she'd been thinking about. Grady Young stood with his hat in his hands, looking surprisingly uncomfortable for a man of his imposing stature. "Miss Zimmerman, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mr. Young. What can I do for you?" He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you wanted to see Thomas's homestead. I'm heading that way tomorrow to check on the livestock he left behind. You're welcome to ride along if you'd like." Zara's heart leaped at the opportunity. "Yes, thank you. That would be most appreciated. I'll come by at 9 then." He turned to go, then paused. "Bring a bonnet. Sun's fierce this time of year." Before she could respond, he was striding away, his long legs carrying him quickly down the street. Zara watched him go, curious about the man who had known her Thomas in his final months. That night, she dreamed of Thomas. In her dream, he stood on the porch of an unfinished cabin, smiling and waving to her. But when she tried to reach him, he grew distant, his image fading until all she could see was the glint of the wedding band in his outstretched hand. She awoke with tears on her cheeks and a determination in her heart to see the place where Thomas had spent his last days. Grady Young arrived precisely at 9 the next morning, driving a small wagon pulled by a sturdy bay horse. He wore a clean blue shirt under his leather vest, and his beard had been trimmed. Zara wondered if he had made an effort for her benefit, then quickly dismissed the thought. "Good morning, Miss Zimmerman." He offered his hand to help her into the wagon. "Thank you for doing this, Mr. Young," she said as she settled onto the seat beside him. She had worn her most practical dress and, following his advice, a wide-brimmed bonnet to shield her face from the sun. As they left town behind, the landscape opened up before them. Rolling prairie stretched to the horizon, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional copse of trees. The late spring air was fresh and carried the scent of grass and earth. "How long have you been in Cottonwood Springs, Mr. Young?" Zara asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Going on 3 years now," he replied, his eyes on the trail ahead. "Came west after the war, apprenticed with a blacksmith in St. Louis for a while, then decided to strike out on my own. The war? She asked, studying his profile. He couldn't be much older than 30. I was young, lied about my age to join up with the Union forces in '64. Saw enough fighting to last a lifetime. Zara nodded, understanding why his eyes sometimes held shadows that didn't match his years. And you met Thomas in the mining camps? Grady's expression softened slightly. Yes, madam. We worked adjoining claims up in the Black Hills for about 6 months. Neither of us struck it rich, but we became friends. When I heard Cottonwood Springs needed a blacksmith, I headed this way. Thomas followed a few months later when he heard about land opening up for homesteading. He wrote to me about his claim, Zara said quietly. He was so proud of it. Said it was perfect for raising a family. Grady glanced at her, then back at the trail. He talked about you all the time, carried your picture with him everywhere. They crested a small rise, and suddenly Grady pulled the wagon to a stop. There it is, he said softly. Below them lay a verdant valley with a clear creek winding through it. A stand of cottonwood trees provided shade near where the foundation and partial walls of a cabin stood. A small corral held a few cattle and a horse. Oh, Zara breathed, understanding immediately why Thomas had chosen this place. It was beautiful, peaceful, and full of promise. Grady gave her a moment before clicking to the horse to continue down the slope. As they drew closer, Zara could see that the cabin was about half finished. The foundation and 3 walls were complete, but the 4th wall and roof were still missing. I've been trying to keep things going, Grady explained as they pulled up to the cabin. Hired the Peterson boy to check on the livestock every other day. Thought you might want to decide what to do with the place. Zara was touched by his thoughtfulness. Thank you, she whispered, emotion making her voice thick. Grady helped her down from the wagon, his strong hands gentle at her waist. She moved away quickly, overwhelmed by the conflicting emotions swirling within her. She walked slowly around the cabin, running her fingers over the logs Thomas had placed with his own hands. In the center of what would have been the main room, a smooth stone hearth had been laid. He finished the fireplace first, Grady said from behind her. Said a home needs a heart before anything else. Tears sprang to Zara's eyes. That sounded exactly like something Thomas would say. She reached into her pocket and clutched the wedding ring, seeking comfort from the cold metal. How did he die, Mr. Young? She asked, not turning around. The letter only said there was a dispute over land. Grady was quiet for so long that she finally faced him. His expression was grim, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. There's a man named Harlan Fletcher who thinks he should own this entire valley, he finally said. He's been trying to drive out the smaller homesteaders. Thomas refused to be intimidated. Zara's heart clenched. Fletcher killed him? Nothing that can be proved in court, Grady replied bitterly. Thomas was found shot in the back while working on the cabin. Fletcher claimed he was nowhere near here that day, and he has men willing to swear to it. Hot anger surged through Zara, temporarily displacing her grief. So, his murderer walks free? For now, Grady said, his voice hard. Sheriff Miller keeps a close eye on Fletcher, but without evidence. He trailed off, then changed the subject. Would you like to see the rest of the property? Zara nodded, swallowing her anger. They walked together along the creek, Grady pointing out the boundaries of Thomas's claim and the plans he'd had for it. The more she saw, the more Zara fell in love with the land her fiancé had chosen. What will happen to it now? She asked as they returned to the wagon. Legally, since you weren't married yet, it would revert to the government unless Thomas had a will naming you as beneficiary. Zara's heart sank. She hadn't even considered this. I don't know if he had a will. We can check with Judge Harmon in town, Grady suggested. But even if Thomas didn't leave a will, you could file a claim yourself. Women can homestead under the law. Hope flared briefly, then dimmed. I know nothing about farming or ranching, Mr. Young. You could learn, he said simply. Or you could sell the claim if Thomas did leave it to you. There would be plenty of interested buyers. Like Mr. Fletcher? She asked sharply. Grady's expression darkened. Fletcher would be first in line, no doubt. Zara looked back at the half-built cabin, imagining what might have been. I need to think about it, she said finally. On the ride back to town, Zara was quieter, lost in her thoughts. Seeing the homestead had made Thomas's death more real somehow, but it had also given her a connection to him she hadn't expected to find. "Thank you for showing me the land," she said as they approached Cottonwood Springs. It helped to see where he spent his last days. Grady nodded. "Thomas loved that place, said it reminded him of a spot you two visited back east." Zara smiled sadly. "Valley Forge. We had a picnic there once, by a creek much like the one on his land." They pulled up in front of her quarters behind the schoolhouse. As Grady helped her down, their eyes met, and for a moment, something passed between them, a shared understanding of loss, perhaps, or simply recognition of another soul who had known hardship. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, releasing her hand. "If you need anything at all, my shop is just down the street." "Thank you, Mr. Young," she replied, suddenly shy. "For everything." As she watched him drive away, Zara felt a confusing mixture of emotions. Grief for Thomas still dominated her heart, but she couldn't deny a whisper of something else, an awareness of Grady Young as a man, not just her late fiancé's friend. The thought made her feel guilty, and she quickly pushed it aside. She had a classroom to prepare and a future to plan. There was no room for such feelings. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Zara prepared for the start of the school term. The men of the town finished the schoolhouse, complete with new desks and a large slate board. Families stopped by to introduce their children, most of whom regarded their new teacher with a combination of curiosity and wariness. Zara kept herself busy during the day, but nights were harder. She would lie awake, the gold wedding ring clutched in her hand, wondering what her life might have been if Thomas had lived. On her darkest nights, she questioned whether she should stay in Cottonwood Springs at all. She saw Grady Young occasionally around town. He would tip his hat and exchange pleasantries, but maintained a respectful distance that both relieved and disappointed her. Once, she passed his blacksmith shop and paused to watch him work, mesmerized by the strength and precision with which he shaped hot metal into useful items. As if sensing her presence, he had looked up, their eyes meeting through the heat ripples rising from the forge. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Then someone called her name, breaking the spell, and Zara hurried away, her cheeks flushed with more than just the heat from the forge. 3 days before school was to begin, Judge Harmon summoned Zara to his office. Grady was already there when she arrived, his tall frame looking out of place among the judge's law books and papers. "Miss Zimmerman," the judge greeted her, gesturing to a chair. "Please, have a seat. Mr. Young thought you would want to hear this news as soon as possible." Zara sat, glancing questioningly at Grady, who nodded encouragingly. "It seems that Thomas Mercer was more foresighted than many young men," Judge Harmon continued, adjusting his spectacles. "He filed a will with me shortly after purchasing his homestead. In it, he leaves all his worldly possessions, including his land claim, to you, Miss Zimmerman." Zara gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "The homestead is mine?" "Legally, yes," the judge confirmed. "There may be some paperwork to complete with the land office, but as his named beneficiary, you have clear title to the property." Joy and sorrow washed over her in equal measure. The land was hers, the beautiful valley Thomas had loved, the half-built cabin that was to have been their home. "However," the judge continued, his expression growing serious, "I must inform you that Mr. Harlan Fletcher filed a competing claim on the property just yesterday." "On what grounds?" Grady demanded, his voice tight with anger. "He alleges that Mercer abandoned the claim before his death, making it available for refiling." The judge removed his spectacles. "It's nonsense, of course. Thomas was actively improving the property right up until his death, but Fletcher has influence with certain officials, and he's demanding a hearing." "When?" Zara asked, her earlier joy evaporating. 2 weeks from today. Until then, I advise you to continue visible improvements on the property to strengthen your case." After leaving the judge's office, Zara stood on the boardwalk, trying to process all she had learned. Grady waited silently beside her, his presence oddly comforting. "He's trying to steal Thomas's land," she finally said. "First he takes his life, and now he wants his land." "Fletcher's used to getting what he wants," Grady replied grimly. "But not this time." Zara looked up at him, struck by the determination in his voice. "What can I do? I have to start teaching in 3 days. I can't be at the homestead making improvements." "I can help," Grady offered, "and I know others who would be willing to lend a hand. Thomas was well liked in town." "Why would you do that for me?" Zara asked, genuinely curious. Grady's expression softened. "For Thomas. And because it's the right thing to do." That weekend, before school started, Grady organized a work party at the homestead. A dozen men from town showed up with tools and supplies. They raised the fourth wall of the cabin and began work on the roof, while their wives cleared land for a garden and planted late-season vegetables. Zara worked alongside them, her heart full as she watched the community come together to help her. Throughout the day, she noticed Grady directing the work, his natural leadership evident in how the others deferred to him. By sundown, the cabin had a roof and a proper door. It was still rough, but it was now a real shelter that could be lived in. "Thank you all so much," Zara said, as people began packing up to return to town. "I don't know how I can repay your kindness." "Just teach our young'uns well," said John Holloway with a smile, "and don't let Fletcher win." As the others departed, Grady lingered, checking the newly hung door to ensure it closed properly. "Will you be staying in town?" he asked. "Or moving out here?" "I'll stay in town during the school week," Zara replied. "But perhaps I could come out on weekends to keep working on the place." Grady nodded. "I'll check on it during the week." Fletcher's not above sabotage. They stood in the doorway of the cabin, the setting sun casting long shadows across the valley. In that moment, Zara could almost see the life that might have been children playing by the creek, meals around a family table, laughter filling the rooms. "Thomas would be pleased," Grady said softly, as if reading her thoughts, "to see you fighting for his dream." "Our dream," Zara corrected, then sighed. "Though now, I'm not sure what I'll do with this place, even if I win the hearing." "You don't have to decide right away." Grady hesitated, then added, "Time has a way of clearing the path forward." As they rode back to town in the twilight, Zara found herself studying Grady's profile. He was nothing like Thomas, who had been slight of build with scholarly inclinations. Grady was all strength and practical skill, a man shaped by physical labor and the hardships of war. Yet, there was a gentleness to him that she found increasingly compelling. The thought made her reach for the wedding ring in her pocket, guilt washing over her for even noticing another man while Thomas was barely cold in his grave. The first day of school arrived, and Zara pushed all thoughts of the homestead and the upcoming hearing from her mind as she welcomed 27 children to her classroom. They ranged from shy 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers, all eyeing her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. "Good morning," she began, smiling warmly. "My name is Miss Zimmerman, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher." By the end of the day, Zara was exhausted but satisfied. The children had been well behaved for the most part, and she had already begun to learn their names and personalities. Teaching had always been her passion, and she was grateful to have this purpose to focus on. As she was locking up the schoolhouse, she spotted Harlan Fletcher for the first time. He was standing across the street, watching her with narrowed eyes. He was a large man, with a florid face and expensive clothes that set him apart from most of the townspeople. Zara straightened her spine and met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. After a moment, Fletcher touched the brim of his hat in a mocking salute and walked away. That evening, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Grady standing there, holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Evening, Miss Zimmerman," he said. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mr. Young. Would you like to come in?" He shook his head. "I won't stay. Just wanted to bring you this." He handed her the package. "For your protection." Puzzled, Zara unwrapped the paper to find a small revolver nestled inside. "Mr. Young, Fletcher was watching you today," Grady interrupted, his expression grave. "I don't trust him, especially now that you're challenging his claim. It's loaded. 5 shots. Do you know how to use it?" Zara shook her head, staring at the weapon in her hands. "I can teach you," he offered, "this Saturday when we go out to the homestead." Zara wanted to protest that she didn't need a gun, but the memory of Fletcher's cold eyes changed her mind. "Thank you," she said instead. "I appreciate your concern." Grady seemed relieved by her acceptance. "Lock your doors at night, Miss Zimmerman, and if you need anything at all, I'm just down the street." After he left, Zara placed the revolver in her bedside drawer, unsure whether she felt safer or more afraid, knowing it was there. The rest of the week passed quickly as Zara settled into her teaching routine. The children were beginning to warm to her, especially after she introduced them to a geography game that had them racing to identify states and territories on a large map. On Saturday, true to his word, Grady arrived to take her to the homestead. When they arrived, Zara was pleased to see that nothing had been damaged in their absence. Fresh lumber had been delivered for completing the interior walls, and Grady explained that he'd arranged for more help the following weekend. After they had inspected the cabin, Grady took out his own revolver. "Time for your lesson," he said, leading her to a spot behind the cabin where he'd set up several cans on a fallen log. "I'm not sure about this," Zara admitted, eyeing the weapon warily. "It's better to know how and never need to than to need to and not know how," Grady replied, checking that his gun was loaded. "Watch first." He demonstrated the proper stance and grip, then fired, hitting 3 cans in quick succession. The shots echoed across the valley, and Zara jumped slightly at each report. "Your turn," he said, reloading his revolver and handing it to her. "Remember, firm grip, steady arm." Zara took the gun, surprised by its weight. Grady moved behind her, adjusting her stance and helping her raise her arm to aim. His chest was warm against her back, his breath tickling her ear as he gave instructions. Zara found it hard to concentrate on the target with him so close. "Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger," he murmured. "Don't pull, just squeeze." She fired, and the gun kicked in her hand. The bullet went wide, missing the cans entirely. "That's all right," Grady encouraged. "Try again." They practiced for nearly an hour, and by the end, Zara had managed to hit 2 cans. Her arm ached and her ears rang, but she felt a strange sense of accomplishment. "You're a natural," Grady said with a smile as they returned to the cabin. "Hardly," Zara laughed, "but thank you for teaching me." They spent the rest of the day working on the cabin. Grady showed her how to measure and cut lumber for the interior walls, and Zara surprised herself with how quickly she learned. By late afternoon, they had framed out what would become the bedroom. As they worked side by side, conversation flowed easily between them. Grady told her about growing up in Ohio, the youngest of 4 boys, and how he'd learned blacksmithing from his father before the war. Zara shared stories of her childhood in Philadelphia, her parents' early deaths from influenza, and how teaching had become her salvation. "Thomas and I met at a literary society meeting," she said as they took a break, sitting on the cabin's front step with cups of coffee. "He was so passionate about books and ideas. We courted for 2 years before he decided to come west. He talked about your letters," Grady said. "Said they kept him going during the hard times." Zara smiled sadly, reaching into her pocket to touch the wedding ring. "I wrote to him every week, even when his replies were delayed by months." "May I ask?" Grady hesitated, then continued. "The ring. You carry it with you?" Zara nodded, slowly withdrawing her hand from her pocket. She opened her palm to reveal the simple gold band. "It was his mother's. He took it with him, planning to place it on my finger when I arrived." Grady looked at the ring for a long moment, then met her eyes. "Keep it till you're ready to try again," he said softly. "Try again?" Zara echoed, confused. "To love," he clarified. "Thomas wouldn't want you to mourn forever." Zara closed her fingers around the ring, unexpectedly moved by his words. "It's too soon to think about that," she whispered. "Of course," Grady agreed quickly. "I didn't mean to presume." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the distant call of a meadowlark. Finally, Grady stood. "We should head back to town before dark." The ride back was quieter than their journey out, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Cottonwood Springs, Zara broke the silence. "Thank you for today," she said, "for the shooting lesson and for helping with the cabin." "My pleasure, Miss Zimmerman." His formality had returned, and Zara found she missed the easy camaraderie they'd shared earlier. As he helped her down from the wagon in front of her quarters, their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary. Zara looked up, meeting his gaze, and saw something there that made her heart beat faster. "Good night, Mr. Young," she said, pulling her hand away. "Good night, Miss Zimmerman," he replied, his voice lower than usual. "I'll see you tomorrow at church." Zara nodded, suddenly shy. "Yes, tomorrow." She watched him drive away, then went inside and closed the door, leaning against it as confusion swirled within her. How could she be developing feelings for Grady Young when she still carried Thomas's ring in her pocket? The days leading up to the land claim hearing passed with agonizing slowness. Zara threw herself into her teaching duties, finding joy in her students' progress and the routine of school days. On weekends, she continued to work on the homestead with Grady and others from town who volunteered their help. With each passing day, the cabin became more of a home. Interior walls were completed, windows installed, and a proper stone walkway laid from the door to the well. Martha Holloway and several other women contributed curtains, dishes, and other household items, storing them in the cabin for when Zara might need them. Throughout these weeks, Zara's feelings for Grady grew, despite her attempts to deny them. He was unfailingly kind, respectful of her grief, and seemed to understand her in ways that sometimes surprised her. Yet, he never overstepped the bounds of friendship, and Zara was both grateful for and frustrated by his restraint. 3 days before the hearing, Zara was working late at the schoolhouse, preparing lessons for the following week. The sun had set, and she had lit an oil lamp to see by. Absorbed in her work, she didn't hear the door open. "Working hard, Miss Zimmerman?" Zara's head snapped up to see Harlan Fletcher standing in the doorway. His large frame blocked the exit, and his smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "Mr. Fletcher," she acknowledged, her mouth suddenly dry. She was acutely aware of being alone in the building with him. "School is closed for the day." "I didn't come about school," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "I came to talk about that land claim of yours." Zara stood, putting the desk between them. "I believe any discussion about the claim should wait for the hearing, with our legal representatives present." Fletcher chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Now, there's no need for all that formality. I'm a reasonable man, Miss Zimmerman. I'm willing to offer you a fair price for that claim. Save us both the trouble of a hearing." "The land isn't for sale," Zara replied firmly, though her heart was pounding. Fletcher's smile faded. "That's a mistake, Miss Zimmerman. A young woman alone has no business trying to run a homestead. And teaching on top of it? Impossible. Nevertheless, it's my land, Mr. Fletcher, left to me by my fiancé." Fletcher moved closer, his eyes narrowing. "Your dead fiancé, who, if he had any sense, would have sold to me when I first made the offer." Cold fear mixed with hot anger in Zara's veins. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Fletcher?" "Threatening? No, no." He smiled again, all teeth. "Just offering some friendly advice. $500 is more than fair for that claim. Take it and go back east where you belong." "The answer is no," Zara said, standing her ground though she was trembling inside. Fletcher's expression hardened. "You're being influenced by that blacksmith. Young should mind his own business." "Mr. Young has been kind enough to help me maintain the property, nothing more," Zara replied, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. "Is that so?" Fletcher sneered. "Well, you should know that he has his own reasons for wanting that land. Did he tell you about the creek, how it runs with more than just water in the spring thaw?" Zara frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Gold, Miss Zimmerman. Not enough to make a man rich quickly, but over time." He shrugged. "Young knows. Why do you think he's so eager to help you keep it?" Doubt flickered briefly in Zara's mind, but she quickly dismissed it. "I think you should leave now, Mr. Fletcher." Fletcher stared at her for a long moment, then turned toward the door. "Think about my offer, Miss Zimmerman. After the hearing, it won't be so generous." After he left, Zara sank into her chair, her legs suddenly weak. She reached into her drawer for the revolver Grady had given her, finding comfort in its solid presence. Fletcher's words about gold nagged at her, but she refused to believe that Grady's kindness was motivated by greed. Still, as she walked home in the gathering darkness, she couldn't help wondering why Grady hadn't mentioned anything about gold, if it was true. The next evening, Zara was just finishing her dinner when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Grady standing there, his expression troubled. "May I come in? I need to talk to you." Zara hesitated, Fletcher's insinuation still fresh in her mind, but stepped aside to let him enter. "Is everything all right?" she asked, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "I heard Fletcher paid you a visit last night," Grady said without preamble. "At the school." "News travels fast," Zara commented, gesturing for him to sit at her small table. "Small town?" Grady remained standing. Did he threaten you? Not directly, Zara replied. He offered to buy the claim. When I refused, he suggested I was being foolish. Grady's jaw tightened. Did he say anything else? Zara studied him for a moment, then decided to be direct. He mentioned gold, Mr. Young, in the creek on Thomas's land. He suggested that was why you've been so helpful, that you want the land for yourself. Pain and anger flashed across Grady's face. And you believed him? I didn't say that, Zara replied carefully. But I am wondering why you never mentioned it, if it's true. Grady ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. It's true there's some gold in that creek, not much, just enough to supplement a farmer's income during lean years. Thomas knew about it. It's one of the reasons he chose that particular parcel. And you, Zara pressed, is that why you've been helping me? No, Grady said firmly, meeting her eyes. I've been helping you because Thomas was my friend, and because... He broke off, looking away. Because? Zara prompted softly. Because I care about you, he admitted quietly. More than I should, given the circumstances. The simple confession hung in the air between them. Zara's heart raced as she absorbed his words, understanding all they implied. I know it's too soon, Grady continued when she didn't respond. I know you're still grieving for Thomas. I never intended to speak of my feelings, but I won't have you thinking I'm after your land. I didn't think that, Zara said, finding her voice at last. Not really, it's just... Everything is so complicated. Grady nodded, his expression solemn. I understand, and I'll respect whatever boundaries you need to set. If you'd prefer I keep my distance. No, Zara interrupted, surprising herself with her vehemence. No, I don't want that. Relief washed over Grady's face. Then I'll continue to help with the hearing and the homestead, as a friend. Nothing more, unless you decide otherwise. Zara felt the weight of the wedding ring in her pocket, a physical reminder of her loyalty to Thomas. Yet standing before her was a man who made her feel alive again, whose presence brought light to the darkness of her grief. The hearing is the day after tomorrow, she said, changing the subject. Do you think we have a strong case? Grady accepted the shift in conversation gracefully. Yes. Judge Harmon has gathered testimonies from several people who saw Thomas working on the cabin right up until his death, and the improvements we've made since then strengthen your claim even further. They spent the next hour discussing strategy for the hearing, the earlier tension gradually easing as they focused on practical matters. When Grady finally left, Zara stood in the doorway watching him walk away, her feelings more confused than ever. The land claim hearing was held in the town hall, with a land office representative presiding. Zara wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Grady sat behind her, along with several other townspeople who had come to show their support. Harlan Fletcher sat on the opposite side of the room, flanked by his attorney and two men Zara recognized as his ranch hands. He smiled confidently at her when their eyes met, as if certain of his victory. The proceedings began with the presentation of Thomas's will and proof of his continuous occupation and improvement of the claim. Judge Harmon testified about the validity of the will and Zara's legal right to inherit the property. Several witnesses, including Grady, described the work Thomas had done on the cabin and how the improvements had continued under Zara's direction. Fletcher's attorney then presented their case, arguing that Thomas had abandoned the claim before his death by spending too many nights in town rather than on the property. He also questioned whether Zara, as a single woman with teaching responsibilities, could fulfill the homesteading requirements of continuous residence and improvement. Miss Zimmerman has already demonstrated her commitment to maintaining and improving the claim, Zara's attorney countered. The law does not require constant presence, only regular occupation and continuous improvement, which she has maintained through her own work and that of hired help. After both sides had presented their arguments, the land office representative called a brief recess to consider his decision. Zara stepped outside for fresh air, her nerves frayed from the tension of the hearing. You did well in there, Grady said, joining her on the town hall steps. Fletcher's arguments were weak. I hope the representative sees it that way, Zara replied, worrying the wedding ring in her pocket. Whatever happens, Grady said gently, you've honored Thomas by fighting for what was his. Zara looked up at him. struck by how well he seemed to understand her. "Thank you for saying that." When the hearing resumed, the land office representative delivered his ruling. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that Thomas Mercer was actively occupying and improving his claim at the time of his death. His will, properly executed and witnessed, leaves said claim to Miss Zara Zimmerman. Mr. Fletcher's claim of abandonment is without merit. He paused, looking directly at Zara. The claim is therefore confirmed to Miss Zimmerman, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. Relief flooded through Zara, followed quickly by a sense of vindication. She had won for Thomas and for herself. Fletcher stormed out of the town hall without a word, his face dark with anger. Zara received congratulations from many in attendance, including Judge Harlan, who warned her to remain vigilant. "Fletcher isn't a man who takes defeat gracefully," he cautioned. "Be careful, Miss Zimmerman." That evening, the town held an impromptu celebration at the Holloways' home in honor of Zara's victory. She was touched by the community's support and growing friendship. As the night wore on, she found herself standing on the Holloways' porch, gazing up at the stars and thinking about the future. "Penny for your thoughts," Grady said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "I was just thinking about what comes next," Zara admitted, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "I've won the land, but now I have to decide what to do with it." "You have options," Grady pointed out. "You could sell it, though I hope not to Fletcher. You could hire someone to work it while you continue teaching. Or, Zara prompted when he fell silent. "Or you could live there," Grady finished. "Make it your home, as Thomas intended." Zara sighed. "I love teaching, but I've grown to love that land too. I'm not sure I can do both justice." "Perhaps you won't have to choose," Grady suggested carefully. "The right partner could make it possible to have both." Zara looked at him sharply, understanding his implication. "Mr. Young." "Grady," he corrected gently. "After all we've been through, I think you can call me Grady." "Grady," she conceded, the name feeling right on her lips. "Are you proposing some sort of business arrangement?" He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "No, Miss Zimmerman. When I propose, it won't be about business." The certainty in his voice not if, but when sent a thrill through Zara that she couldn't deny. Yet guilt followed closely behind, as it always did when she found herself responding to him. "I still carry his ring," she whispered, more to herself than to Grady. "I know," he replied, his voice equally soft. "And I would never ask you to set it aside before you're ready. Some wounds take time to heal." Their conversation was interrupted by Martha Holloway calling Zara inside to cut the cake that had been prepared in her honor. The moment passed, but Zara found herself thinking about Grady's words for the rest of the evening. 2 days later, as Zara was dismissing her students for the day, one of the older boys came running back into the classroom, his eyes wide with alarm. "Miss Zimmerman, there's smoke coming from the direction of your homestead." Zara's heart dropped. She rushed outside to see a dark plume rising from the north, exactly where Thomas's cabin stood. Without hesitation, she gathered her skirts and ran toward the blacksmith shop. "Grady!" she called as she burst through the door. "The cabin, it's burning!" Grady was at the forge, hammering a piece of red-hot metal. He dropped his tools instantly, dousing the forge. "Fletcher!" he growled, his face grim. "It has to be." Within minutes, Grady had hitched his fastest horse to a wagon, and they were racing north out of town. Other men, seeing the smoke and hearing the news, mounted up to follow. The journey seemed to take an eternity, though Grady pushed the horse to its limits. As they crested the final rise, Zara's worst fears were confirmed. The cabin was fully engulfed in flames, the fire crackling hungrily as it consumed the wooden structure. Grady pulled the wagon to a halt at a safe distance, but Zara was already jumping down, running toward the burning building. "Zara, no!" Grady shouted, catching her around the waist before she could get too close. "It's too dangerous!" "Everything we built," she sobbed, fighting against his restraining arms. "All of Thomas's work gone." "The land is still yours," Grady reminded her, turning her away from the heartbreaking sight. "We can rebuild." As they stood watching the fire, men from town arrived and organized a bucket line from the creek. Their efforts were valiant, but ultimately futile. The fire had too much of a head start. By the time they managed to extinguish the flames, all that remained of the cabin was the stone hearth and chimney, standing like a lonely sentinel amid the charred ruins. There were tracks leading away to the west, John Holloway reported, his face smudged with soot. 2 horses, riding hard, had to be Fletcher or his men. "Can you prove it was Fletcher?" Zara asked, her voice hollow. "Probably not," Sheriff Miller admitted, having arrived with the others. "But I'll investigate." As twilight fell, people began to return to town, offering condolences and promises of help to rebuild. Zara thanked them mechanically, still numb with shock and grief. Finally, only she and Grady remained, standing before the smoking ruins as the first stars appeared overhead. "I thought I'd lost everything when Thomas died," Zara said quietly. "Then I found this place, and it gave me a connection to him. Now it's gone too." "Not everything is gone," Grady replied, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The land is still here, the creek, the trees. We can rebuild the cabin, stronger than before." Zara turned to face him, struck by his use of "we" instead of "you." In his eyes, she saw not pity, but determination and something deeper, a promise. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because I love you," Grady said simply. "I've tried not to, tried to respect your grief and give you time, but I can't pretend anymore, especially after today." Zara reached into her pocket and withdrew the wedding ring, holding it in her palm, as she had so many times before. In the fading light, it glinted dully, a symbol of what might have been. "Thomas is gone," she said softly, the words releasing something inside her. "The cabin is gone, but I'm still here." "Yes," Grady agreed. "You are." She looked up at him. This man who had stood beside her through so much, who had helped her fight for Thomas's land, and now offered to help her rebuild. The feelings she had been denying surged forward, too strong to ignore any longer. "I think," she said carefully, "that I'm ready to try again." Understanding dawned in Grady's eyes. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he cupped her face in his calloused hands and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Zara responded, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, both breathing harder, Zara closed her fingers around the ring. "I'll always cherish this," she said, "as a reminder of Thomas and what he meant to me. But I can't live in the past anymore." "No one is asking you to forget him," Grady assured her. "He'll always be part of who you are." In that moment, with the stars brightening overhead and the man she now knew she loved standing before her, Zara felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's death. The path forward was suddenly clear. "Will you help me rebuild?" she asked. Grady smiled, taking her hand in his. "I'll help you build whatever future you want, Zara Zimmerman." They returned to town that night. Something fundamental changed between them. Over the coming weeks, as Zara continued teaching and plans were made to rebuild the cabin, their relationship deepened. They were often seen together, working side by side at the homestead on weekends or walking through town in the evenings. Harlan Fletcher was eventually arrested for the arson, though not directly. One of his hired hands, caught stealing in a neighboring town, confessed to setting the fire on Fletcher's orders in exchange for a reduced sentence. Fletcher was forced to pay restitution and left the territory shortly thereafter, his reputation in ruins. By early fall, the new cabin was taking shape, larger and sturdier than the original. On a crisp Saturday morning, as they worked on installing windows, Grady suddenly set down his tools. "Zara," he said, his expression serious, "there's something I need to ask you." Zara's heart skipped a beat as Grady reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. He opened his hand to reveal a simple silver ring with a small sapphire that matched her eyes. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he explained, suddenly nervous. "I know it hasn't been that long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Zara Zimmerman, I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Zara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Grady Young, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Zara felt Thomas's presence one last time, not as a ghost or a regret, but as a blessing. She had loved and lost, but found the courage to love again. They were married that November in the newly completed schoolhouse with the entire town in attendance. Judge Harmon performed the ceremony, and Martha Holloway wept happy tears as she watched the couple exchange vows. After the wedding, they moved into the new cabin on the homestead. Grady continued his blacksmith work, setting up a small forge near the cabin, while Zara taught during the week. They turned Thomas's land into a thriving homestead, with a garden, livestock, and eventually, children who played by the creek just as Zara had once imagined. On their first anniversary, Grady gifted her a small wooden box he had crafted himself. Inside, lined with velvet, was a perfect space for Thomas's wedding ring. For safekeeping, he explained, a part of your history that deserves to be honored. Zara placed the ring in the box with reverence, then closed the lid. The past was preserved, but her present and future belonged to Grady and the life they were building together. "I love you," she told him, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "And I love you," he replied, his arms encircling her waist. "Always." As they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, Zara thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had come west to marry one man and found happiness with another. She had lost everything, then gained so much more, and it had all begun with a wedding ring held in her palm and a cowboy who had told her to keep it until she was ready to try again.